There exists a great variety of landscapes that are representative of the different regions of the world. Combined works of nature and humankind, they express a long and intimate relationship between peoples and their natural environment. This quote is extracted from UNESCO's home webpage on cultural landscapes. The reason why I chose to open with this quote is that it will lead us beautifully into this month's article focusing on the theme of revitalization of rural heritage landscapes, specifically in relation to the article that I wrote, The Significance and Essentiality of Estonian Rural Landscapes. Now, it's important to understand that UNESCO does have places in which they have recognized the cultural significance of landscapes, such as the agave landscape and ancient industrial facilities of tequila in Mexico. There is also the coffee cultural landscape of Colombia, as well as cultural landscape of the Honghe honey rice terraces in China. Those are just few examples of quite many other places that have been recognized. However, what is important to recognize is that the common landscape of everyday agriculture is so often dismissed and overlooked, which is why I wanted to introduce from the top and work our way to the bottom that there is recognized heritage landscapes, but redirecting our focus into the importance and vitality of the common landscapes that is so often overlooked. So, to get into it, I would like to clarify that prior to 1992, the submission of agricultural heritage landscapes to UNESCO for the representative list was an incredibly strenuous process due to the lack of frameworks in which to operate in, according to Mitchell and Barrett in their article Exploring Agricultural Heritage Landscapes, A Journey Across Terra Incognita. But the issue of a lack of framework has been rectified since then and is now understood to be, quote unquote, a type of organically evolved continuing cultural landscape retaining an active social role in contemporary society closely associated with the traditional way of life in which an evolutionary process is still in progress. And as previously stated, talking about the common, humble landscape of the environment in which we live and operate in on a day-to-day basis, I want to exemplify the ways in which these are just as equally important as those on the UNESCO representative list, because these landscapes that we live in facilitates and sustains our livelihoods as creators and living beings. And this poses a challenge in the sense that if a landscape is not recognized by an organization such as UNESCO, then it lacks importance. But it's the very opposite. Everything has its own importance, its own role in our everyday life. And that's what I would like to exemplify in this video in relation to the article for this month. But before we get deeper into this topic, very interesting topic, I'd like to draw on Merriam-Webster American Dictionary to define the word landscape. And the definitions, multiple, that came up were a picture representing a view of natural inland scenery, the art of depicting such scenery, the landforms of a region in an aggregate, a portion of territory that can be viewed at one time from one place, or even a particular area of activity. So even the dictionary gives a very broad definition of what landscape is. And that has, like previously mentioned, been very difficult to create a framework in which to operate in. So in the article Introduction, Landscape Change and Rural Development, the authors use a quote that is defined by the European Landscape Convention that hoped to incorporate the multifaceted notions and approaches as a zone or area as perceived by local people or visitors whose visual features and character are the result of action of natural and or cultural, that is, human, factors. This definition reflects the idea that landscapes evolve through time as a result of being acted upon by natural forces and human beings. It also underlines that a landscape forms a whole whose natural and cultural components are taken together, not separately. The academic field of landscape studies also is gaining traction and has only really begun in the last few years. So it's quite fascinating because we're not just looking at landscapes itself, because landscapes transcends into so many other fields. It's a very interdisciplinary field. Some aspects that it covers is ecology, economic studies, cultural disciplines, and so forth. The list could go on and on because humans work with the land and therefore can't be segregated to be just a secular field in which operates in a vacuum state, because it doesn't. It transcends into all different fields and studies of the human life. So, drawing from the multiple articles that were utilized in data collection, I found that there was a vernacular pattern that occurred that utilized landscapes to be inferred as a space in which stimulates the human interaction through food, language, biodiversity, traditions, culture, and ultimately identity. So, for this article, I want to focus on the food and cultural identity that is facilitated and operates through the everyday heritage landscapes. And the first article I'd like to really delve into is Nina Marie Lister's article titled Placing Food, Toronto's Edible Landscape. Now, I'm not studying Toronto, Canada. However, her article really encapsulates a phenomenon that is happening today and has been happening and will be happening for the many years to come if we are to do nothing. For without land, there would be no food, right? So, why is the landscape so important, aside from the fact that it grows our food? I like to draw on Nina Marie Lister's article, Placing Food, Toronto's Edible Landscape, because she talks about the changing relationship between human beings and the landscapes and the effects that are coming from these changes. In majority of the world, particularly in cities of Western countries, we consume foods that have traveled thousands of kilometers away, bringing in bananas, avocados, strawberries, plums, oranges that are neither a native, indigenous to that area, such as Stockholm, Sweden, nor are they in season because these foods are available, say, in November when it's autumn. The harvest of the natural landscape is over, such as in December, where the snow is on the ground for the far northern hemisphere, such as February, where most things are in hibernation or completely dead because it's very cold. The modern globalized world and therefore food industry is allowing consumers to have a variety of vegetables, fruits, and other specialty delights at their fingertips that really denies the laws of nature. Seasons cease to have power over what we can have in which season. Bananas are always available to us because they come from different places, such as Ecuador. If Ecuador is not supplying it, then it might move over to Australia. If Australia is unable to fulfill the banana shipments, then it might move to Thailand. So these foods are now becoming very transient. They're shifting over into the realm of the placeless food idea that Nina Marie Leister has utilized for her article. So, placeless food is quite a catchy term. Placeless, to not have a place. She captures this notion as foods that consumers buy and consume with little concern of the origins of these foods, how these foods were grown, and even the production of these foods. And this is not to dismiss the fact that there are no positive aspects, because there are. We are able to have these delicious avocados because avocados have been heralded to be incredibly healthy fats for our bodies, to bananas, which can release chemical reactions of dopamine or serotonin and so forth. We also have the availability of international food markets. You could buy your cumin, your fenugreek, your chives to cilantro, coriander for those that don't speak American English, and so forth. We've expanded outside of our indigenous foods, the cuisines, such as in the far north, it would probably be most reliant on potatoes, a lot of root vegetables that can withstand long storage, winter storage particularly. But while we have all these positive aspects, we are ignoring the multiple risks at hand that could lead to dire consequences for the future generations to come. And Nina Marie Leister quotes Barbara Kingslover, who warns of getting quote unquote cheap food at a price not measured in money, but in untallied debts that will be paid by our children in the currency of extinctions, economic unravelings, and global climate change. So, with that, we are now looking at environmental risks that are impacting the planet through the usage of fossil fuels in the farming industry. A lot of farmers rely on coal to run the machinery, heavy machinery, to meet the standards of mass populations needing grain, corn, and vegetables, and so forth, as well as the long distances that our food is traveling to get into our local nearby grocery store. But not only that, corporations are also monopolizing the farming sector, and they are driving small farmers to either sell out because there's no money to be made or be completely engulfed into their business model. But with that comes the mass production that decreases soil fertility and genetic diversity that will lead to extinction. Now, to explain the loss of soil fertility and genetic diversity, what Nina Leister means by that is that when you do not rotate your crops, the soil, particular vegetables, will consume a lot of nitrogen or calcium from the soil, and that's why there's crop rotation, because some vegetables or fruits or plants and so forth will take more of this but give back this, and then you rotate your crops, and then that which was lost because of the previous plant will be given back by the current plant, and so forth. I hope that made sense. But there's also the genetic diversity, which also leads into biodiversity. And what Nina Marie Leister means by this is that 95% of cabbages, varieties of cabbages, 95. There's also 94% of peas, 91% of field corn varieties, and 81% of tomato varieties no longer exist as of 2007. Today is September 2019. This article came out almost 12 years ago. How much more of these varieties have been lost? And the loss of these varieties is due to the mass production and industrialization, because there's such a heavy emphasis on producing one type of potato, on one type of tomato, of one type of corn in order to meet mass production needs of the population that exists and inhabits the planet today. But what's the importance of this? Biodiversity within vegetable and fruit crops is incredibly vital because there are particular breeds that are intended to flourish in certain regions of the globe under certain environmental conditions. And without these, the production and cultivation of these foods becomes increasingly more and more reliant on pesticides, fertilizers, and human intervention. As we simplify our food system, according to Leister, we are attacking the environment's capacity for evolution and adaptation to inevitable change. There's also social implication with placeless foods as well, such as previously mentioned small farmers and the lack of economic sustainability against these large monopolies. And socially, these small farmers are essential to the rural heritage and lifestyle. If they were to be pushed out completely, we face the possibility of cultural distinction, one that is important for mankind as agriculture has been intrinsic and essential to our evolution of where we have come today in a cosmopolitan world. At the very core of these complex issues and risks lies the simple question of value. If a society does not value its farmers and farmland, then it does not value the capacity to grow its own food, and both will eventually be lost. To develop this notion of identity, I'd like to draw on a book by Enrique Salmon, and it's titled Eating the Landscape: American Indian Stories of Food, Identity, and Resilience. And he has a fantastic quote that is, landscapes have the power to influence people's ideas about themselves because of the history that has unfolded on them. What is unique about the relationship between landscape and humanity is that the landscape itself sustains the biological needs of a human, which then transcends into becoming a vehicle that culminates memories built upon generation after generation, as well as a cultural knowledge of the land. As Salmon says, the food itself and the landscape from which it emerges activates in us an encoded memory. Lands and food then become a source of knowledge and history. Throughout the centuries of human existence, people of a particular region had propagated foods that were specific to that geographical location and climate, which therefore created a resilient, naturally resilient variety of potatoes, tomatoes, squash, peas, and so forth. But these foods are then harvested and are intrinsic to the affair of creating cultural dishes. It is this very process that employs tangible heritage foods that represent and reflect the intangible heritage of us, of the people of that area. It's not only the dishes, however, that encompass heritage and culture, but it's the process as well. And as Salmon says, the processes interconnect family, landscape, collective knowledge, story, and an encoded library of cultural and ecological knowledge, all of which sustain and revitalize a sense of self and place. With the formulation of these different themes and ways to perceive the rural landscape from these authors of articles and books, I like to now move forward into the Estonian context. And with that, I like to draw on Karen Ojasuu's master's thesis, published in 2014 at Tartu University in Estonia. And so we're now working with a concept of landscape and how that is intrinsic into the cultivation of identity, cultural community, and rural identity. Ojasuu begins the thesis by stating that rare and unique landscapes are valued, while everyday common agricultural landscapes are so often dismissed or overlooked. But with the dismissal of these agricultural heritage landscapes follows the threat of both losing productive vitality and the cultural heritage stimulated by these geographical localities. For their research, what they did is conduct a questionnaire that included 44 different respondents, and they aged between 9 years old to 57. They are both men and women with different levels of education, ranging from primary school, I presume that would be the 9-year-old, to higher education, such as masters and doctorates. They also live in very different parts of Estonia, such as villages to cities to the deep rural countryside. So Oyasu really tried to be as inclusive of all sorts of people, citizens of Estonia. And for their thesis and questionnaire to be credible, they asked their respondents to give an idea of what a traditional Estonian landscape is to them personally. Describe what it is. And one respondent said, as I've grown up and live in an area where there has been intensive agriculture, the landscape of Estonia for me is this: cultivated fields here and there, a bit of alder bushes, farmhouses located separately, and somewhere on the horizon, good and strong mixed forest. Another respondent said, I think the landscape in Estonia is divided into two parts. In the North Estonia, mostly flat ground, limestone cliffs, and few water bodies. In contrast, in the South Estonia, hillier landscape, more water bodies. And another one said, Estonian landscape is characterized by the abundance of forests with agriculture and pasture lands. There's also very little people that live in an area, tiny villages and settlements, and so forth. Oyasu also asked her respondents to provide a picture to exemplify how they perceive traditional landscapes of Estonia. And within their thesis, they have about between 6 and 10 photos as examples, which reflect quite well or exactly what these respondents were saying, how they perceive the land. So, utilizing the collected data from their questionnaire, Oyasu concludes that the majority of Estonians perceive the Estonian traditional landscape to be of rural places with fields and forests, typical Estonian villages with old farm buildings, grain fields located on the roadside, pasture land further away, and lots of natural environmental factors such as trees, water bodies, shrubs, and the likes. Karen Oyasu's questionnaire had multiple questions which aided her in the production of her thesis. However, there are two particular statements which is essential to this article. But before we get there, I like to describe what their questionnaire was like. So they would produce statements, and participants would either circle 1 through 5, being do not agree, rather do not agree, neutral, rather agree, or completely agree. And some of the questions was Estonian rural landscape is well maintained. In the Soviet period 1940 to 91, the change of the landscape environment ruined traditional landscape of Estonia. Have you heard of the European Landscape Convention? Are the protection, management, and planning of surrounding environments important for you? And so forth. The two questions two statements, that Karen Oyasu asked their participants was the first statement, which is landscape has an important role in regional and local cultural patterns development. Landscape carries a significant part of the European natural and cultural heritage. In total of the 44 respondents, 57% of them completely agreed with the proposed statement, while 30% rather agreed and 14% remained neutral. The do not agree and rather do not agree remained at 0%. The second statement that I like to bring up is operating specifically within the Estonian framework, because Oyasu's questionnaire was partly Estonian and partly broader European perception of cultural landscape and heritage. And the second statement is traditional rural landscape needs protection and preservation. Again, 57 of the respondents completely agreed with that statement, while 25% rather agreed and 16% remained neutral. Again, both rather do not agree and do not agree remained at 0%. So that's really important because we are now understanding that there is no disagreement with the statement, even if a person remains neutral. Maybe they don't feel particularly motivated by the statement, but 57% of the people completely agree with that statement, that the traditional landscape of Estonia is important to them and should be preserved and maintained so that it has longevity into the further generations. There was also an article that was written and published by ERR, which is the Estonian Public Broadcasting. It's available on the webpage, this article. And in 2014, there was talk of needing to provide more incentives and quote unquote gifts for young Estonian population that were willing to move into the rural countryside and take up an agriculture career. Juhan Saragava, who is the head of the Central Union of Estonian Farmers, stated that the percentage of young Estonians working in this agriculture sector was, quote unquote, only a tenth of what is needed. And at the time of this published article, there was only 7% of agricultural workers who were under the age of 35, while over 1/3 exceeded the age of 65. So we're now also seeing the effects that there is a significant decline of people willing to work in the rural countryside, to take up agriculture, farming, and so forth. Meanwhile, the majority of those that are in that sector are of an older generation. They are aging. At some point, there needs to be a shift over with the young taking over the old people's positions. But that's not happening. And that should bring up concern for not just Estonians, but within asking yourself, within my own country or even community, is there a deficit of farmers? Because if so, then that poses a massive problem. Rural heritage and identity is going to be lost with the loss of this generation as they move on to the next phase of their lives and so forth. Because now there's a sense of urgency that is happening with the lack of young people. And this introduces the monopolies that will step in and drive the soil fertility, the genetic diversity of varieties to a local region into oblivion. And then there will come a time in which, as we are well aware of climate change occurring at the moment, these crops will become under threat. Pesticides and fertilizers, people are becoming more and more aware and wanting to know, was my food grown with or without this? And some, if financially able, to do opt out of these commercially grown foods for small farmers' produce and products. But back to the article that was published by the Estonian Public Broadcasting. This is very, very alarming, or at least it should be alarming, because this article captures a sense of urgency because young people need incentives. They need to be promised that there is economic stability for them if they choose to go into the agriculture sector. And this decline is not happening just in Estonia, but all over the world. And to close out this video, the importance of revitalizing the rural heritage landscapes not only preserves and sustains the cultural aspects that are shared between us and the landscape, but also the agriculture heritage landscapes can also make vital contributions to heritage tourism, food sovereignty, and therefore food security. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this theoretical background of landscape and rural heritage and identity was able to question how you see yourself and the farming industry for you personally within your community, within your nation, within the global worldwide context, because these are important questions that we should be asking ourselves and what we can do for a better tomorrow. Thank you.